Princess Amelie never thought a book about ocean pollution would change her entire life. She was sitting in the quiet corner of Oxford University's ancient library, surrounded by towers of research papers about dying coral reefs. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across her notes about microplastics destroying marine life. She had been working on this environmental project for weeks, but something was missing. The science was there, but she needed real field experience, someone who had actually been underwater, who had seen the damage with their own eyes. That's when she noticed him. David Chen was hunched over a laptop 3 tables away, completely absorbed in what looked like underwater footage. His screen showed the most beautiful coral reef she had ever seen, alive with colors that seemed to glow even through the computer monitor. Without thinking, she walked over. "Excuse me," she said softly, not wanting to disturb other students. "Is that your research?" David looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. He had been working for 6 hours straight and was deep in concentration. But when he saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes, his irritation melted away. "Yeah, it's from my dive last month in the Maldives. I'm studying how rising ocean temperatures are bleaching the coral." He paused, noticing her stack of similar research papers. "Are you working on something related?" "I'm trying to understand the connection between plastic pollution and coral death, but I've never actually seen a healthy reef in person." Her voice carried a hint of frustration. "All my research is just numbers and charts." David smiled for the first time that day. Numbers and charts are important, but they can't show you how a reef sounds when it's healthy. The clicking of shrimp, the gentle movement of fish through the coral branches. It's like an underwater city. That conversation lasted until the library closed at midnight. They moved to an all-night cafe, then walked along the Thames as the sun rose, still talking about ocean conservation. David had never met anyone who understood his passion so deeply, and Amelie had never spoken to someone who made science feel like poetry. To David, she was simply Amy, an environmental science student with an unusual accent he couldn't quite place. She had this way of asking questions that showed she really cared about the answers. When she talked about wanting to make a real difference in the world, her whole face lit up. What struck him most was how she listened. Really listened. Not the polite nodding he usually got when he talked about his research, but genuine engagement. She asked follow-up questions that showed she understood the complexity of marine ecosystems. "Where are you from?" he asked as they watched the sunrise over the river. "A small country you probably haven't heard of," she replied with a mysterious smile. "But I've always felt more at home in the ocean than on land." Over the following weeks, they became inseparable research partners. David would return from diving expeditions with underwater footage and samples, while Amelie somehow managed to secure funding for equipment and research trips that would normally take months of paperwork to approve. They spent long nights in the marine biology lab, analyzing water samples under microscopes and debating the best ways to restore damaged ecosystems. David taught her how to read underwater topography maps, while she helped him understand the political and economic factors that made conservation so challenging. Their first research trip together was to Cornwall, studying the effects of plastic pollution on local marine life. David was amazed by how quickly Amelie adapted to scuba diving. Most beginners were nervous underwater, but she moved through the water like she belonged there. "You're a natural," he told her as they surfaced after their 3rd dive. "It's like you've been doing this your whole life." "Maybe I have, in another life," she laughed. But there was something wistful in her voice. During those 6 months, David fell in love not just with Amelie, but with her vision of what marine conservation could become. She talked about creating large-scale protected areas, about bringing together scientists and world leaders to make real change happen. Her ideas were ambitious in a way that made him believe impossible things were possible. Amelie, meanwhile, discovered what it felt like to be valued for her mind rather than her title. David challenged her ideas, disagreed with her theories, and treated her as an equal. He never asked about her family or her background beyond casual curiosity. For the first time in her life, she was just herself, Their breakthrough came when they discovered a new method for measuring microplastic concentrations in coral tissue. The discovery could revolutionize how scientists track pollution damage in marine ecosystems. They worked 18-hour days perfecting their technique, surviving on coffee, and shared excitement about their findings. We could present this at the International Marine Biology Conference. David suggested one evening as they reviewed their data for the 100th time. "Do you really think it's good enough?" Amelie asked, though her eyes were shining with pride. "Amy, this could change how the entire scientific community approaches coral conservation. We're not just documenting the problem anymore. We're creating solutions." That night, as they celebrated their success with fish and chips by the harbor, David realized he was completely in love with this mysterious woman who had appeared in his life, like a gift from the ocean itself. But their perfect world was about to shatter in the most public way possible. The photograph appeared on the front page of every British tabloid the next morning. David discovered Amelie's true identity not from her confession, but from a newspaper headline screaming "Princess in love with commoner" above a photo of them kissing by the harbor. His hand shook as he read the article describing Princess Amelie of Valdoria, third in line to the throne, and her secret romance with an American student. Everything suddenly made sense. The mysterious funding, the way she sometimes seemed to know things about international politics that no student should know, the careful way she never talked about her family. When she arrived at the lab that morning, she found him sitting in silence, the newspapers spread across their research table. "I can explain," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. David looked up at her with eyes full of hurt and confusion. 6 months, Amy, 6 months of lies. "My name really is Amelie," she said desperately, "and everything I told you about caring for the ocean, about wanting to make a difference, that was all true. But you never told me who you really are. How am I supposed to trust anything you've said?" The pain in his voice broke her heart. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't prepared for how much it would hurt to see the man she loved look at her like she was a stranger. "Because I wanted you to love me, not my title," she said, tears streaming down her face. "With you, I could just be myself. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" David stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the lab floor. "I need time to think about this, about us, about everything." As he walked away, Amelie sank into her chair, surrounded by their research, their shared dreams, and the newspapers that had just destroyed the most honest relationship of her life. 3 days passed before David answered Amelie's calls. When he finally did, his voice was different, distant, careful. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her over the phone, "about wanting to be yourself with me." Amelie held her breath, sitting in her tiny student apartment that she had rented to feel normal. Outside, photographers were still camped on the street, hoping for another shot of the princess playing at being ordinary. "I understand why you didn't tell me," David continued, "but I need to know something. Was any of it real? The late nights in the lab, the excitement about our research, the way you looked at me when we were underwater together, everything was real," she whispered. "David, you have to believe me. Those were the most honest months of my life." "Then, prove it." That conversation changed everything. David made a decision that surprised even himself. If Amelie wanted to be with him, really be with him, then she would have to live in both worlds, his world and hers, and he would learn to navigate hers, no matter how impossible it seemed. Their first real date after the truth came out was a disaster. Amelie had arranged for them to meet at a quiet restaurant outside Oxford, but the security team that appeared with her made David feel like he was dining with the president. 3 men in dark suits sat at nearby tables, watching every person who walked through the door. "This is insane," David muttered, trying to cut his steak while being stared at by half the restaurant. "I know it's overwhelming," Amelie said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "But this is my reality. This is what being with me means." David looked at the security guards, then at the other diners whispering and taking pictures with their phones. "How do you live like this every day?" "I don't, usually. At home, it's even more intense." "But David," If we're going to make this work, you need to understand something. I'm not just a princess. I'm a person who happens to be a princess, and I'm a person who loves you." Over the following weeks, David got a crash course in royal life that no university could have prepared him for. Amelie taught him which fork to use at formal dinners, how to bow properly to her parents when he eventually met them, and why he could never, ever post anything about their relationship on social media. It's like learning a completely different language, he complained after struggling through a lesson on proper titles and forms of address. "You're learning fast," Amelie laughed. "Last week you called my cousin dude during a video call. Yesterday you actually remembered to say your highness." Your cousin seemed to like being called dude. He did, but his mother nearly fainted. The hardest part wasn't learning royal protocol. It was learning to live in secret. When David's research colleagues asked where he disappeared to on weekends, he had to make up stories about visiting his aunt in London. When his parents called from California asking about his love life, he had to pretend he was still single. Amelie struggled even more. She had to lie to her own family, telling them she was focusing entirely on her studies while secretly flying back and forth between Oxford and David's research sites around Europe. Her brother Edward suspected something when she suddenly became an expert on marine biology. During family dinners, "Since when do you know so much about coral bleaching?" he asked her one evening. "It's part of my environmental studies," she replied. Quickly, climate change affects everything, even small island nations like ours. Edward raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. He had always been the most understanding of her siblings, but even he would struggle to accept a relationship with a commoner. Their secret getaways became elaborate operations that would have impressed international spies. A simple weekend in Scotland required 3 different cars to fake identities, and a security team that had to pretend they were protecting someone else entirely. David learned to pack light and move fast, changing locations if they spotted any photographers. "Sometimes I feel like we're running a resistance movement," he joked during one particularly complicated trip to Ireland, where they had switched cars twice and used a fishing boat to reach a remote island. "In a way, we are," Amelie replied, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. "We're fighting for the right to love each other without the whole world having an opinion about it." The most magical moments came when they were completely alone. David would take her diving in remote locations where no paparazzi could follow. 20 feet underwater, surrounded by schools of fish and swaying seaweed, they were just 2 people who loved the ocean and each other. "This is where I feel most like myself," Amelie told him during a dive off the coast of Wales. "Down here, there are no crowns, no protocols, no expectations, just us and the water." David squeezed her hand through their diving gloves. "Maybe that's why we found each other. The ocean brought us together because it knew we both needed a place to be free." But living a double life was exhausting. David started making mistakes at work, missing important meetings because he was secretly flying to meet Amelie in different countries. His research suffered as his attention was divided between marine biology and learning to be the secret boyfriend of a princess. Amelia's grades began to slip as she spent more time managing their complicated relationship than studying. Her professors at Oxford noticed her frequent absences, and her family's royal duties were becoming harder to balance with her desire for a normal university experience. The breaking point came during David's presentation at the International Marine Biology Conference. He had been looking forward to this moment for months, ready to share their groundbreaking research with scientists from around the world. But as he stood at the podium, explaining their discoveries about microplastics in coral tissue, all he could think about was how Amelie should have been standing beside him as his research partner. Instead, she was in Valdoria, attending a state dinner with visiting diplomats, pretending to be interested in trade agreements when she really wanted to be talking about saving the oceans. After his presentation, David's colleagues congratulated him on his solo achievement. They had no idea that half the research belonged to a princess who couldn't take credit for her work, because it would raise too many questions about how she had funded their expeditions. That night, David called Amelie from his hotel room in Vancouver. I presented our research today, he told her. How did it go? I wanted to be there so badly. That's the problem, Amelie. You should have been there. This was our work, our discovery, our moment. But I had to stand up there alone and pretend like I did everything myself. There was silence on the other end of the line. I know it's not fair, she finally said. But David, we both knew this wouldn't be easy, Amelie. I'm living a lie every single day. I can't tell my friends about the woman I love. I can't share my achievements with my research partner. I can't even post a picture of us together. This isn't just not easy. This is impossible. What are you saying? David stared out at the Vancouver skyline, his heart breaking with every word he was about to say. I'm saying that I need you to choose, really choose. Not just between your royal duties and spending time with me. I need you to choose between being a princess and being with me, because I can't keep living in the shadows of your life. Amelie stared at her phone for 20 minutes after David hung up. His words echoed in her mind like a song she couldn't stop hearing. Choose between being a princess and being with me, as if it were that simple, as if she could just walk away from centuries of family tradition like she was quitting a job she didn't like. She was sitting in her childhood bedroom in the palace, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had all made the same choice: duty over love, crown over heart. Every princess before her had married for political alliance, for the good of the kingdom, for everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. State dinner tomorrow with the Duke of Wellington's son. He's very interested in marine conservation. Perfect match for you. Perfect match. Amelie almost laughed. The Duke's son probably thought marine conservation meant not littering at the beach. He would never understand the intricate dance of ocean currents, or the way coral polyps built entire underwater cities grain by grain. He would never look at her with the same wonder David showed when she explained how plastic particles traveled through the food chain. But he would be acceptable. He had the right bloodline, the right education, the right bank account. He would never ask her to choose between her crown and her heart, because he wouldn't care enough about her heart to notice the difference. David's ultimatum gave her 6 months to decide. 6 months to figure out if love was worth losing everything she had been born to become. The first month was the hardest. She threw herself into royal duties with desperate energy, trying to convince herself that this life was enough. She attended charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and diplomatic meetings. She smiled for photographers and made small talk with foreign dignitaries about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Everyone commented on how focused and dedicated she seemed. Her parents were thrilled that she had finally grown out of her university phase and was taking her responsibilities seriously. They had no idea she was slowly dying inside. At night, she researched constitutional law, trying to understand exactly what she would lose if she chose David. The answer was everything: her title, her home, her family's acceptance, her place in the line of succession. She would become a regular citizen, completely cut off from the only world she had ever known. But she would be free to love who she wanted, free to pursue her real passion for marine biology, free to take credit for her research and stand beside David at conferences, free to post pictures on social media like any normal couple, free to just be Amelie instead of Princess Amelie. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, David was struggling with his own demons. He had taken the research position in Australia partly to escape the constant reminders of Amelie. But the ocean followed him everywhere. Every sunset over the Great Barrier Reef reminded him of their first dive together. Every coral formation looked like something she would have gotten excited about. His colleagues at the Marine Research Station noticed his distraction. Dr. Peterson, the head researcher, found him staring at the horizon during what should have been his lunch break. "Whatever's eating at you, son, it's affecting your work," Peterson said, sitting down beside him on the dock. David almost laughed. If only it were that simple. Just personal stuff back home. Woman trouble, you could say that. Peterson was quiet for a moment, watching the waves lap against the research station's pillars. "You know, I've been doing marine research for 35 years. been all over the world, seen things most people only dream about. But the biggest discovery I ever made wasn't about fish or coral or ocean currents. What was it? That the ocean teaches you everything you need to know about life. It's patient, but it's also powerful. It shapes the land slowly, over time, but it never gives up. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, it creates something extraordinary, something worth protecting. David looked at the older man, wondering if he somehow knew about Amelie. Point is, Peterson continued, if you found something extraordinary, you don't let it go without a fight, even if the currents are against you. That night, David wrote his first letter to Amelie. He wrote about the coral restoration project he was working on, about the way the reef was slowly healing itself with careful human intervention. He wrote about how some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. He never sent the letter, but he kept writing them, one every few days, filling a drawer with thoughts he couldn't share and feelings he couldn't express. Back in Valdoria, Amelie was doing research of her own. She spent hours in the palace library, reading about other royals who had given up their titles for love. The stories were rare, but they existed. Princess Margaret of Sweden in 1964, Prince Michael of Greece in 1965. They had all survived. They had all found happiness outside the golden cage of royalty. But they had also all been men or distant relations to the throne. She would be the first direct female heir in Valdoria's history to walk away from her birthright for love. The third month brought an unexpected test. Amelie was attending a marine conservation conference in Monaco. When she saw David's name on the program, he was presenting his coral restoration research via video link from Australia. For 45 minutes, she sat in a darkened conference room, listening to the man she loved talk about saving the reefs they had first studied together. His voice was different, stronger, more confident, but also sadder. He spoke about coral regeneration with the same passion he had always shown, but there was something missing. The joy was gone. The wonder that had first attracted her to him had been replaced by professional competence. During the question and answer session, Amelie raised her hand. Dr. Chen, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room microphone. Your research shows remarkable progress in coral regeneration. But I'm wondering about the human element. How do you maintain hope when you're working alone on such a massive problem? There was a long pause before David answered. Through the video screen, she could see him processing the question, maybe recognizing her voice. That's a good question. He said finally, I think the key is remembering that you're never really alone. The ocean connects all of us. Every person who cares about marine conservation is part of the same ecosystem. Even when we're separated by distance or circumstances, we're still working toward the same goal. Amelie felt tears streaming down her face. He was talking to her, giving her the answer to the question she had been asking herself for months. The fourth month brought devastating news. Her grandfather, the king, suffered a heart attack, nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to make everyone think about succession and duty and the future of the monarchy. Amelie spent weeks at his bedside, listening to him tell stories about the choices he had made for the good of the kingdom. Leadership isn't about doing what you want, he told her one afternoon. It's about doing what's needed, even when it breaks your heart. But on his better days, he told different stories about the woman he had loved before he married her grandmother, for political reasons, about the life he sometimes wondered about, the one where he had chosen differently. Regret is a heavy crown to wear, he whispered to her one evening, heavier than the real one. In the fifth month, Amelie made her decision. She spent one last night in her childhood bedroom, looking at the portraits of all the princesses who had come before her. They stared back with painted eyes that seemed to understand her choice. Even if they had never been brave enough to make it themselves, she wrote 3 letters. One to her parents, explaining her decision and apologizing for the pain it would cause. One to her brother Edward, asking him to understand and promising to always love her family, even from a distance. And one to the people of Valdoria, thanking them for their loyalty and explaining why she had to follow her heart. Then she booked a flight to Australia. The research station was more isolated than she had imagined. After a 12-hour flight to Sydney and another 3-hour charter plane ride to the remote location, Amelia found herself standing on a wooden dock in the middle of the ocean, holding a small suitcase and her heart in her hands. David was underwater when she arrived. Dr. Peterson pointed toward a diving flag about 100 meters from shore. "He'll be up in about 20 minutes, Peterson said, clearly recognizing her despite her attempts to dress casually. "Been wondering when you'd show up." "You knew I would come," Peterson smiled. "That boy's been writing letters he never sends for 5 months. Either he was going crazy, or he was waiting for someone. My money was on waiting." When David surfaced and saw her standing on the dock, he floated in the water for a full minute, just staring. Then he swam toward shore with powerful strokes, his diving gear forgotten in his urgency to reach her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, water dripping from his wetsuit as he climbed onto the dock. "I made my choice," Amelia said simply. "I choose you. I choose us. I choose love over everything else." David searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or regret. "What about your family? Your crown, your entire life?" "My entire life is standing right in front of me," she replied. "Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." David stood on the dock, water dripping from his wetsuit, staring at the woman who had just turned his world upside down again. Part of him wanted to sweep her into his arms and forget about the 5 months of pain they had both endured. But another part of him, the part that had been broken by her silence, needed answers. "You can't just show up here and expect everything to go back to normal," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Do you have any idea what these months have been like for me?" Amelia's confident expression faltered. She had prepared for many reactions, but not this careful distance from the man she loved. "I know I hurt you," she said quietly. "I know disappearing without explanation was wrong. But David, I needed time to figure out what I was willing to sacrifice for us." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That a life without you isn't worth living, even if it comes with a crown." Dr. Peterson cleared his throat from behind them. "Maybe you two should take this conversation somewhere more private. The whole research team is pretending not to watch." From the lab windows, David looked back at the marine station, where several faces quickly ducked away from the glass. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Come on, let's walk." They made their way along the narrow beach that surrounded the research station. The late afternoon sun painted the water gold, and the only sounds were waves lapping against the shore and seabirds calling overhead. It was beautiful and peaceful, but the tension between them was thick enough to cut. "Tell me what really happened these past 5 months," David said. "Not the princess version, the real version." Amelia kicked at the sand as they walked. "I tried to convince myself that duty was enough. I went to every royal event, smiled for every photograph, had dinner with every suitable bachelor my parents introduced me to. I even went on 3 dates with the Duke of Wellington's son." David felt a stab of jealousy despite himself. "How did that go?" "Terrible." He spent 2 hours explaining why he thought marine conservation was a waste of money. Said the ocean was big enough to take care of itself. She looked at David with tears in her eyes. "All I could think about was how you would have argued with him for hours about coral bleaching and microplastics." They walked in silence for a few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. "I attended a marine conservation conference in Monaco." Amelia continued. "You were presenting your research via video link." David stopped walking. "You were there? In the audience? I asked you a question during the Q&A session about maintaining hope while working alone." "That was you?" David ran his hands through his damp hair. "I knew that voice sounded familiar. What you asked me about working alone on such a massive problem. You said we're never really alone because the ocean connects all of us. That everyone who cares about marine conservation is part of the same ecosystem." "I was talking to you, I know. And that's when I realized something important. We're not just two people who fell in love. We're partners in research and conservation, in changing the world. I can't do the work I'm meant to do without you beside me." They had reached the end of the beach. where a small rocky outcropping created a natural seating area. David sat down on one of the larger rocks, and after a moment's hesitation, Amelie joined him. "So what's your plan?" David asked. "You give up your title, we get married, and live happily ever after in exile? Actually, I have a better idea." Amelie pulled a folder from her bag. "I've been working on something for the past 2 months. A proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "A research proposal. For a new organization that would combine royal influence with grassroots scientific work." "Think about it, David. I still have connections with world leaders, access to funding sources, the ability to bring global attention to marine conservation. But I also have you. With your research expertise and field experience." David opened the folder and began reading. The proposal was for an international marine conservation foundation that would establish protected areas, fund cutting-edge research, and create educational programs around the world. It was ambitious, comprehensive, and brilliant. The Ocean Alliance Foundation, he read aloud, co-founded and co-directed by Dr. David Chen and Princess Amelia of Valdoria. He looked up at her. "You want us to work together officially?" "I want us to do everything together officially. Research, conservation work, changing the world." Growing old, she took a deep breath. "David, I'm not here to ask you to take me back. I'm here to ask you to marry me." David nearly dropped the folder. "You're proposing to me? Why should you have to do all the hard work?" Amelie laughed, but her hands were shaking. "Besides, I'm the one who needs to prove that I'm serious about choosing you over everything else. What about your family, the crown, the scandal this will cause?" "My grandfather had another heart episode last week. He's fine, but it made me realize something. Life is too short to spend it being unhappy just to make other people comfortable. As for the scandal, let them talk. History will judge us by the work we do, not by whether we followed proper protocol." David stared at the proposal, then at the woman who had just asked him to marry her while sitting on a rock in the middle of nowhere. "You're completely insane. Is that a yes or a no?" Instead of answering immediately, David stood up and walked to the water's edge. The sun was setting, turning the sky pink and orange. Schools of fish were jumping in the distance, and somewhere below the surface, coral reefs were slowly healing themselves with patience and time. "There's something I need to show you first," he said, pulling out his diving equipment. "Put this on." "David, I didn't bring any diving gear. Use mine. I know these waters like my backyard. We'll stay shallow." 20 minutes later, they were floating 10 feet underwater, surrounded by the most beautiful coral reef Amelie had ever seen. Fish in every color imaginable swam between the coral branches, and the entire ecosystem pulsed with life and energy. David pointed to a section of reef that was clearly newer than the rest. Young coral polyps were growing on artificial structures, slowly building what would become a thriving habitat for countless marine species. It was his restoration project, his life's work made visible. He pulled out a waterproof slate and wrote, "This is what we could build together. Not just coral reefs, but a better world." Amelie took the slate and wrote back, "Is that a yes?" David smiled behind his diving mask and wrote one more word, "Always." They surfaced as the stars began to appear overhead. Back on the beach, David pulled Amelie close and kissed her properly. For the first time in 5 months. "So we're really doing this?" he asked. "Princess and the marine biologist saved the world together?" "Dr. Chen and Dr. Amelie saved the world together," she corrected. "I'll finish my PhD. You'll finish your research, and we'll build something that matters." "What about the whole marriage thing?" "Because I should probably point out that I don't have a ring, and this proposal was supposed to be my job." Amelie laughed and pulled a simple band from her pocket. "I brought my own ring. It belonged to my great-grandmother, the only princess in our family history who married for love instead of duty. She lived to be 97 and was happy every single day." David slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "When do we tell the world about our engagement?" he asked. "Tomorrow. But tonight, let's just be to people who love each other and the ocean, planning to spend the rest of our lives protecting both." They walked back to the research station hand in hand, ready to face whatever storm their announcement would bring. Because some things were worth fighting for, and love, combined with purpose, was the strongest force in any ocean. The plane ride back to Valdoria felt like the longest 12 hours of Amelia's life. She sat in the first-class cabin, holding David's hand while he stared out the window at the clouds below. Neither of them had slept much the night before, too, busy planning what they would say to her family and preparing for the media storm that was about to hit. "Are you sure about this?" David asked for the 10th time since they had boarded. "Once we walk into that palace, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything," Amelia replied, though her stomach was doing flips. "My family needs to meet the man I'm going to marry. And David, I need you to see where I come from. Even if I'm about to leave it behind." The news of their engagement had already leaked somehow. By the time their plane landed in Valdoria, photographers were waiting at the airport. Security guards surrounded them as they made their way to the waiting royal car. But David could still hear reporters shouting questions about their secret marriage and his intentions toward the princess. "Princess Amelia, is it true you married in secret?" "Dr. Chen, what do you say to critics who call you a fortune hunter? Will you be giving up your research to become a prince?" David squeezed Amelia's hand tighter. "I feel like I just stepped into a movie," he whispered. "Welcome to my world," she whispered back. "Just remember, no matter what happens in there, we're a team now." The palace was even more intimidating than David had imagined. Centuries of history lined the walls in the form of paintings, tapestries, and golden artifacts servants bowed as they passed, and David felt completely out of place in his simple khaki pants and button-down shirt. "Should I have worn a suit?" he asked nervously. "You look perfect," Amelia assured him. "You look like yourself. That's all I ever wanted." They were escorted to a formal sitting room where the entire royal family was waiting. King Ferdinand sat in an elaborate chair that was almost throne-like, while Queen Isabella perched rigidly on a matching seat beside him. Prince Edward, Amelia's older brother, stood by the window looking uncomfortable, and Princess Catherine, her younger sister, sat on a couch looking curious and slightly amused. The silence in the room was deafening. "Mother, father," Amelia began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'd like you to meet David Chen, the man I'm going to marry." Queen Isabella's eyes swept over David from head to toe, taking in his American casualness and obvious nervousness. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold. "You brought a human?" she asked, the word dripping with disdain. In royal circles, calling someone a human instead of using proper titles was the ultimate insult. It meant they were beneath consideration, unworthy of formal recognition. David felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment, but before he could respond, Amelia stepped forward. "He's my husband," she said clearly, her chin raised in defiance. "We were married yesterday in a civil ceremony in Australia." The room erupted in chaos. Queen Isabella gasped and reached for her smelling salts. King Ferdinand stood up so quickly his chair rocked backward. Princess Catherine's mouth fell open in shock, while Prince Edward turned from the window with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You did what?" the king roared. "Without permission, without proper ceremony, without any consideration for your duty to this family and this crown, I married the man I love." Amelia replied firmly, "The man who shares my passion for making the world better, the man who sees me as a partner, not just a pretty face to put on official photographs. He's a nobody," Queen Isabella shrieked. "A commoner, a fortune hunter who's obviously using you for your title and money." David had heard enough. Despite his nervousness, despite being completely out of his element, he stepped forward and addressed the Queen directly. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, I don't want Amelia's title or her money. I want to spend my life working beside her to save the world's oceans. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves." "How dare you speak to the Queen without being addressed first?" King Ferdinand snapped. "Because someone needs to defend your daughter," David shot back, his scientific precision replacing his earlier nervousness. "She's brilliant, passionate, and dedicated to marine conservation in ways that could change the entire world. But all you seem to care about is whether I have the right bloodline. Prince Edward suddenly spoke up from his position by the window. Actually, I think we should hear what David has to say. Amelia's been different these past few years. Happier, more focused. If this man is the reason for that change, maybe we should listen. Edward, don't encourage this nonsense. Queen Isabella warned. It's not nonsense. Mother, I've watched Amelia try to fit into the mold we created for her, and she's been miserable. But when she talks about her research, about ocean conservation, about making a real difference in the world, she lights up. If David is part of that passion, then maybe we're the ones who need to change our perspective. King Ferdinand looked at his son in surprise. Edward had always been the dutiful heir, never questioning royal traditions or expectations. You support this madness? The king asked. I support my sister's happiness, Edward replied simply. And I support anyone who wants to use their privilege to help the planet, instead of just attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies. David seized the moment. Your Majesties, I know this isn't what you planned for Amelia, but I have a proposal that might address your concerns, while still allowing us to build a life together. He pulled out the folder containing their foundation plans and placed it on the ornate coffee table. Between them, Amelia and I want to create an international marine conservation organization. She would retain her royal connections to attract funding and political support, while I would handle the scientific research and field work. We could do more good for the world together than either of us could accomplish alone. Queen Isabella picked up the folder with obvious reluctance, but David could see her reading it carefully. King Ferdinand leaned over to look as well. You want to create a foundation? The king asked. We want to save the oceans, Amelia corrected. The foundation is just the tool we'll use to do it. David's coral restoration research could be expanded globally. We could establish marine protected areas, fund cleanup efforts, educate the next generation about ocean conservation. And what about your royal duties? Queen Isabella asked sharply. I'll fulfill them, Amelia promised, but I'll also be doing work that matters to me personally. Work that could be my real legacy, not just ceremonial appearances. David took a deep breath and made the decision that would define their future. I have another proposal, he said, looking directly at King Ferdinand. I don't want any royal titles. I don't want any inheritance or special privileges. I want to remain Dr. David Chen, marine biologist. Let Amelia keep her royal status and duties, but allow her to also be Dr. Amelia Chen, my research partner and co-director of our foundation. The room fell silent again. Even Queen Isabella seemed surprised by this suggestion. You would be married to a princess but remain a commoner, King Ferdinand asked. I would be married to the woman I love while remaining myself, David corrected. Isn't that what real partnership means? Supporting each other's goals without losing your own identity? Princess Catherine suddenly clapped her hands together. I think it's romantic, like a fairy tale, but better because it's real. Catherine, this is not a fairy tale, Queen Isabella scolded. This is a constitutional crisis. No, Mother. Prince Edward interjected. This is evolution. The monarchy needs to change with the times, or it becomes irrelevant. If Amelia and David can use royal influence to actually help the world, isn't that exactly what we should be encouraging? King Ferdinand studied the foundation proposal for several long minutes while the room held its breath. Finally, he looked up at David and Amelia. This foundation of yours, you really believe it could make a difference? I know it can. David replied confidently. We've already started the preliminary work. With proper funding and international support, we could establish protected marine areas on every continent within 5 years. The king nodded slowly. Very well. I'll allow this marriage to stand, and I'll support your foundation. But there are conditions. Name them, Amelia said immediately. You will continue your royal duties and represent this family with dignity. Your husband will be treated with respect by our staff and included in appropriate royal functions. But he will not receive any titles or formal royal status. And most importantly, your first loyalty must always be to the people of Valdoria, my First loyalty is to making the world better for everyone, including the people of Valdoria. Amelia replied. David stepped forward and offered his hand to the king. Your Majesty, I promise to support Amelia in all her duties, royal and otherwise. And I promise that our work will bring honor to your family and your country. King Ferdinand hesitated for a moment, then shook David's hand. Welcome to the family. Dr. Chen, try not to make me regret this decision. As the family began discussing the practical details of their new arrangement, Queen Isabella pulled Amelia aside. You realize this won't be easy. She said quietly, the press will be ruthless. Other royal families will gossip. You'll be criticized for every decision you make.